Ah, hello. Welcome to another episode of Jack Mountain Journal. This week we're going to be looking at composting, focusing on Humanure composting systems. So stick around and learn a couple of things. Hi, and thanks for coming out today. Just enjoying a little bit of light reading here in the outhouse. We're going to talk a little bit about composting and how to do it. There's a lot of conflicting information out there, and some of the recipes for compost are overly complicated at best. So it's pretty simple. We've been doing it here for about 10 years. The same system works great, really cheap, and it'll save you a lot of money and headache in the long run. So let's take a look at this. What I'm inside here, I'm in a little outhouse that we've built on the back side of our barn. We've got a clear plastic roof, so we don't need any lights in here. If you're in here in the middle of the night, people often use a headlamp. So what I'm sitting on here is I've got a little toilet box. There's nothing underneath us right here, right? Most outhouses have a big pit underneath, and that's not the case here. With this outhouse, it's just a wooden box with a toilet seat on it. Right, empty inside, and then this is just your run-of-the-mill 5-gallon bucket. So we can put it back up. So what you do is you make your deposit into the bucket, then you cover it over with a bit of sawdust, and we'll talk about that in a bit. Then when the bucket's full, we'll throw it on the compost bin and cover it with hay. That's it. So let's take a look at compost here for a bit. So far today, this morning, beautiful April day, I've eaten some bananas and had a little bit of coffee. So let's take a look at what that looks like in the bucket here. Little bananas, a little bit of coffee, a couple of eggshells. It usually doesn't look quite like this. So this bucket's going to represent the bucket in the toilet. After you make your deposit, you want to cover everything with some sawdust. You can also use peat moss. You can use ground up dried leaves. Pretty much whatever you have on hand. So after I cover everything with sawdust, it's going to kill the odors, right? It's going to balance the carbon nitrogen ratio. So now it could sit in here or in the bucket until the bucket's full and you're ready to dump it. So next we're going to show you how we go dump it. So I've got my compost bins here, I've got my bucket full of good compost material, and I've got my cover material. In this case, it's just some old mulch hay. So all I'm going to do, dump this onto the pile. Cover it over with the cover material to kill any odor, keep the bugs and critters out. And then I'm done. Then I just have to rinse off my bucket, and that's all there is to it. So now you've seen how easy it is to have an odorless, efficient thermophyllic composting system. What you do now is you just wait. The compost is going to heat up on its own. It heats up to such a degree that it kills off all the pathogens, and then you let it sit and age for about a year. And if you're ever worried that it didn't sit long enough, let it sit for 2 years, and you won't have a problem. If you're going to use this in your food garden, in your vegetable garden, or in other areas where the compost will come in direct contact with the crops that you're going to be eating, get yourself a handy-dandy compost thermometer. The way this works is you just stick it into the compost and it'll tell you how hot it is inside the pile. And inside the Humanure Handbook, the book that you're probably going to want to go and get after watching this video, they'll give you a graph or chart showing how hot for how long in order to kill all the bad stuff off. With regards to compost, there's 4 important ingredients in the pile here that you'll need to take into account. You need to have them there to end up with good, rich, luxurious compost. Number 1 is moisture. You don't want to put a roof over your compost. You want it to get a decent amount of rain in there. And if you live in a really dry area, you're going to want to add water to it. You know, compost isn't a dead thing. Think of it as a big living organism, or kind of like a living sponge. The microorganisms that are in there that are going to break everything down need water to operate. Number 2, temperature. This is a hot compost pile. They call it a thermophyllic compost system. Thermo meaning heat, phyllic meaning it likes it. So, in order to have good finished product and kill all the pathogens, you're going to want to make sure that it heats up. If you're not sure that it heats up, say you go away for 4 or 5 weeks in the summer and you still want to use it, just let it age for an extra year and you should be okay. And if you're ever worried about it, then plant flowers in it or put it around the base of a tree, but don't put your food crops in it and you shouldn't have a problem. Number 3, your compost pile needs oxygen. Those little microorganisms in there, they break down things aerobically. So in order to have oxygen in there, some of the big scale composting outfits, they force air into it. They have pipes running in and then all sorts of crazy high-tech gizmos and gadgets. The way that we do it here is by using coarse covering materials. You saw that we have the hay to cover over the compost with, and then we throw another layer of compost on top. Because it's a coarse material, there's going to be little air pockets in there, and that's sufficient to feed the oxygen that the microorganisms need. Lastly, you're going to need a good carbon and nitrogen balance. But the reason a lot of compost piles stink and don't work is because they're all carbon. The way that we change that equation and add plenty of nitrogen is by adding the human waste in there. You know, the urine and the feces is very high in nitrogen, and so that balances off the carbon of the hay and the sawdust and the kitchen scraps and the weeds and things such as those. So once again, the 4 things you need: moisture, oxygen, temperature, and a good balanced diet to feed that carbon-nitrogen ratio. There's a bunch of persistent myths about composting that often put the backyard composter at odds with the so-called experts. Like most things in life, you're probably better off if you take the experts with a grain of salt. So after composting for 10 years, and then reading through some of the books on composting, I was really intimidated, because you'd think you'd need to tend to your compost almost as a full-time job, or like it's your kid or something, which you don't need to do. Myth number 1, turning the compost pile. Some of the books advocate getting in there with a pitchfork and flipping it over in order to make sure that it all gets adequate oxygen. Because we use a coarse cover material, we don't have to do that. It's actually detrimental to turn your pile, because you might inhibit some of the compost from heating up hot enough to kill off the pathogens. So don't turn it. Be lazy. Number 2, adding a starter or an inoculant to the compost. Because we're using a Humanure system, everything that it needs is all right there inside of it. You don't need to add anything to it. Number 3, adding lime to the compost. You don't need to add lime to your compost. If you want to make sure that there's extra lime in your soil to make it a little bit sweeter, a little less acidic, then add the lime right to your soil. The compost is going to do fine without it. And lastly, number 4, the extensive list of items that are forbidden to put in your compost, including things like meat, cheese, fat, all sorts of stuff like that. As I said, we've been doing this for 10 years. We put everything in the compost. Some things compost better than others. For example, a big steak bone or something maybe won't compost quite as well, but it's not going to hurt the compost at all. And then you don't have to worry about it. You have a simple system that you use over and over and over. The bottom line here is that we humans are often trying to improve on Mother Nature, but it's never going to work. She knows what she's doing. So our job, instead of trying to come up with lots of ways to trick out the process and make it more and more complicated, is just to shut up, get out of the way, and let her do her job. And she's been doing fine at it for millions of years, and will for millions more. You know, since we started producing Jack Mountain Journal, a lot of people have emailed and called and told me that I'm full of crap. Well, I intend to take care of that problem right now. So we'll see you next time. You guys are gonna have to give me my space here, and we'll see you next time. That was terrible.